Pandemic was just a distant rumor. That was about one year, 7 months ago. At the time, the talks of the Building Bridges initiative was still, the task force was still collecting views from Kenyans. We had the president there address Parliament on the 4th of April 2019, saying the economy was expected to grow back at an annual average rate of 6.6%. Let's speak now to Billow Kerrow, former Senator, Mandera County, still with us. Let's speak about the fact that this address will be given to a joint sitting of Parliament at a time when the National Assembly has announced it will appeal against the court's decision nullifying 23 laws passed without the approval of the Senate. Do you expect the president to speak to the state of the bicameral parliament?
Yes, I think both the executive and the National Assembly knew that those laws were going to be challenged. In fact, from 2014, when we first, the Senate went to court, Supreme Court, to get an advisory on the division of revenue. So it's been, simmering for a while, and they knew that sooner or later these laws would be declared null and void by the courts. And so I'm sure they have appealed, and our courts would probably, the appeal court may or may not agree with the National Assembly, but the reality is that those laws have not been properly passed. And I think the impact of some of these laws are some of the taxations, the taxes that have been passed. For example, you remember when 8% VAT, was passed. There are a lot of implications, and the argument has always been that virtually, nearly all, not all, but nearly 90% of all the laws that are passed by the National Assembly impact on counties, and because the impact on counties, it is necessary for the Senate. And there's an advantage in this. Look at what's happening in US, in other countries that have bicameral houses. The reason why they have an upper house or a Senate is a quality control, to give more validity, to give more, to make those laws more legit in terms of giving that opportunity to for members of Parliament to review at a second house, so that how many laws have, you remember how many laws have been actually thrown back by the president from National Assembly because for one reason or the other they did not comply either with the Constitution or they did not comply with good sense, or they were not addressing any particular mischief. All those would have been addressed if there was an opportunity for both houses to look. That checks and balance is what the second house is about, and I think it's important that that can. But I think Parliament, more significantly, has actually failed Kenyans in one key aspect. Parliament in the last couple of years has really failed Kenyans in terms of providing oversight to the executive, so that the executive, because all these challenges we've seen in terms of public debt, the economy that is now sinking is largely because of the public debt. If it wasn't for the huge public debt, the 1.5 trillion revenues that Kenyans pay would be enough to finance the government of the Republic of Kenya. But you see, all those projects, all that money that has been lost through the pilferage, wastage, corruption, this responsibility for oversight and playing second fiddle to the executive in the last couple of years, literally, has really made Kenyans to suffer as they're doing right now. And even in this crisis of COVID, it's not for lack of money, but you are in a situation where this country is able to manufacture all the PPEs we require. It's able to manufacture all the masks and everything we require, and the government has pledged, time again from the onset of Corona, that they are going to provide these things to all Kenyans. But we have seen medical workers on the streets demonstrating publicly that they are leaving their jobs because they do not have protective equipment. And so there is lack of, as usual with our government, is lack of priorities, totally misplaced priorities. Instead of addressing the sufferings, and that's why we have representatives in Parliament. That's why people elect MPs in both houses, to focus the executive's responsibilities to addressing the concerns of the people. And so I think that is some of the challenges we have had with this with this government, and we've in fact it's reached a point where it's the executive that is checking Parliament. It's the other way around, and they have been summoned time and again to State House and, you know, to other offices and being thrown out of their respective committees and, you know, being asked to do this or that. I think it's unfortunate, but, you know, that those checks and balances in a government, all the three arms must carry out their responsibilities, without which
there have been concerns. There have been concerns, of course, that this dysfunction in Parliament, this sibling rivalry, has been to blame for the low pace of development, as the president had promised. And of course, the president today will basically be taking stock of his own record, telling Kenyans whether he has fulfilled his promises largely under the Big Four agenda. Has Parliament played a role in derailing the president's Big Four agenda?
I do not think so. I think the president's first and foremost responsibility is to protect the Constitution. That is his fundamental responsibility in the Constitution. So when he knows that a particular law that has been brought to him for signature has been challenged by the other house, he has a duty to ask the National Assembly, please take it back to the Senate, and they need to consult, and that, you know, as required by the Constitution. He didn't. I mean, let me be frank, I think the executive was a party to that. And so if there's any derailing, you know, from his development agenda, then the executive is complicit, because the National Assembly did not do the things it did because it did not know the law, but it's because of at the behest of the executive. Right? That seems to come out quite often from the Senate, that these things are being done, and you can know that because then the executive has never returned a particular, you know, law and said, okay, that law should go back also to the Senate, because that's what the Constitution says. No. And so I think, on coming back to the question you have actually raised on whether the sibling rivalry within the Parliament does in any way impede or limit the executive or the president's execution of his mandate, well, I don't think so. I think there is no bill that I can remember other than the division of revenue, where the president's hands were tied and he could not carry out his functions or carry out his executive mandate because of some bill that has not been passed. No, I don't think so. There hasn't been. The only thing that has always caused a bit of a standstill has been the division of revenue bill, with Senate sticking to the recommendations of the CRA, and the KNA, the National Assembly, sticking to the with the executive, and the president coming out clearly and taking sides and saying that I don't have money to give, and sticking to what the National Assembly has said. So, but otherwise, I do not think that Parliament's quarreling between the two houses in any way can be an excuse for the executive for failure to deliver on his promise to Kenyans over the years.
The Constitution also stipulates key areas that the President ought to address or talk about in this address. One of them, this is Article 132 of the Supreme Law, is to talk about all the measures taken and the progress achieved in the realization of national values referred to in Article 10, an article that you had referred to before. Speak to us about your views on this in light of the conversation surrounding the BBI report.
Very well. Article 10 of the Constitution is one of the very, I would say it is the heart of the Constitution, really, because it touches on what are the goals, what are the values, really, of, and the things which, hold us together as a nation. And the President's oath is about ensuring that he addresses those issues. This is why once every year he must give a statement on the realization of these national values. And if you look at it, what are those national values? It talks about patriotism. It talks about national unity, about sharing and devolution of power and resources, non-discrimination, protection of the marginalized, of those areas, those kind of things. It talks about equity. It talks about social justice, inclusiveness. And all of those are the issues which are under Article 10. Good governance, integrity, and transparency and accountability. Those three they are broadly into split into those three areas. And so in his speech, he needs to tell us on that. And I'm sure what the president would start off with probably in addressing those three is that BBI would cover most of these issues, that he's trying to address inclusivity, he's trying to address the unity of the nation, equity, and and all those things through BBI. That would be one thing that he would come up with. He would also mention the issue of integrity and accountability and so forth on good governance in terms of dealing with corruption in the government. But I think what he's supposed to do in this address is not to speak broadly on those subjects, but to specifically state what his government has done in the last 12 months since the last public address, national address, what his government has done in terms of achieving. So it's about incremental action that the government has taken in the last 12 months in terms of achieving those things. BBI was already in the pipeline when he was addressing the country in 2019. It's still in the pipeline. I mean, it's not a document. It's not a something that has been concluded, and it's still the jury is still out on it. And I'm sure you are aware that there are so many people who are not exactly happy with the way it's been done. So I think what we want to hear from the government is in terms of these issues, what exact actions the government has taken to enhance inclusivity. What action has this government taken in terms of enhancing unity of this nation, and in terms of